Lady Beatrice Ashworth stood before the towering oak doors of Winterbourne Manor, with her heart hammering so violently she feared it might shatter her ribs. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains around her, blanketing the manicured gardens and marble statuary in pristine white that felt almost mocking in its purity. Beyond those doors, violins sang their sweet lies beneath the murmur of London's finest society. Out here, the world held its breath, as if the very air knew what was about to unfold. Bee's gloved hand tightened around the small, warm fingers clasped on her own. She looked down at the child beside her, a little girl of barely 3 years, with dark curls that refused to be tamed, and eyes the precise shade of stormy grey that haunted Bee's dreams. The child gazed up at her with absolute trust, innocent of the chaos about to erupt. "Mama?" The word was soft, tentative. "Are there many people inside?" Bee knelt on the snow-dusted stone, heedless of her dark green gown, the finest she owned, which was not fine at all by the standards of those gathered within. She adjusted her daughter's cloak with trembling fingers, letting the gesture linger as if she could somehow shield not only the small body before her, but her own wavering courage. "Yes, darling, very many people." Her voice emerged steadier than she dared hope. "But you must stay close to me, understand? No matter what happens." The child, Charlotte, named for Bee's mother who had died never knowing she had a granddaughter, nodded with solemn gravity. "I'll be good, Mama. I promise." Bee's throat tightened. She rose, smoothed her skirts with hands that refused to stop shaking, and forced herself to breathe. The sharp winter air burned her lungs, but it was memory that bent her spine for one fleeting moment. Memory of another winter night 3 years past. Memory of strong arms and whispered promises. Memory of a love she'd believed could survive anything. She had been wrong about that. Bee pushed the doors open before fear could root her to the spot. The entrance hall unfurled before them like a living painting. Glittering chandeliers, silk gowns in jewel tones, gentlemen in impeccable evening dress, and at the far end, a Christmas tree so tall it seemed to scrape the vaulted ceiling. Candlelight danced across crystal and gold, casting everything in a warm glow that felt profoundly at odds with the ice in Bee's veins. The moment she crossed the threshold with Charlotte's hand in hers, the collective murmur faltered. A violin missed a note. A glass struck crystal with a discordant chime. Then silence spread through the ballroom like water freezing over a lake. Swift, inexorable, absolute. One by one, faces turned toward her. Bee felt each stare land like a physical blow. Some she recognized. Lady Pemberton, who had once called her unfortunate but respectable. Lord Ashford, who had danced with her twice before, deciding she wasn't worth a third dance. Mrs. Whitmore, whose pity had always felt more cutting than contempt. All of them had attended her memorial service 3 years ago. All of them had mourned the tragic loss of quiet, unremarkable Lady Beatrice Ashworth in that terrible carriage accident, and all of them were staring at her ghost. But it was the man at the centre of the ballroom who stole what remained of her breath. Nathaniel Thornfield stood between pools of candlelight and shadow, tall and impossibly elegant in midnight blue evening dress that made his dark hair appear almost black. His grey eyes, Charlotte's eyes, fixed on Bee with an intensity that cut through 3 years and 1,000 unspoken words. He had always been beautiful. Time had only sharpened that beauty into something more dangerous. His jaw was harder now, his shoulders broader. The easy warmth she remembered from stolen moments, replaced by the cool authority of a duke who had inherited a title he'd never wanted, and learned to wear it like armour. Bee watched recognition move across his features, disbelief, shock, something that might have been hope before it drowned in confusion. His hand, which had been resting casually on the arm of the woman beside him, fell away as if burned. The woman. Bee's gaze shifted, though it cost her to look away from Nathaniel even for a heartbeat. Lady Helena Carrington stood at his side in a gown of silver silk that seemed to capture and reflect every candle in the room. She was exquisite, golden hair arranged in perfect ringlets, features that belonged on a cameo, the kind of ethereal beauty that made men write poetry and women despair. She wore the serene smile of a woman utterly secure in her position, the smile of Nathaniel's fiancée. Bea had known, of course. She'd read about the engagement in the papers during the endless months of hiding. She'd traced the announcement with shaking fingers, Nathaniel's name blurring through her tears as she'd held their newborn daughter, and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice in staying away. Seeing it in print had been agony. Seeing Helena's hand resting possessively on Nathaniel's arm was something else entirely. A knife sliding between ribs with surgical precision. "Mama!" Charlotte's whisper pulled Bea back from the edge of panic. "Everyone is staring." "I know, sweet girl, it's all right." But it wasn't all right. Nothing about this was all right. Bea forced herself to take the first step, then another. The crowd parted before her, not out of courtesy, but out of shock. People stumbling backward, as if she might contaminate them with her impossible resurrection. The whispers began immediately, a rising tide of speculation and scandal. "Is that... It can't be. Lady Beatrice Ashworth died 3 years ago. Who is the child?" Bea walked through that gauntlet of stairs with her spine straight and her chin lifted, refusing to show the fear threatening to choke her. Charlotte pressed against her side, one small hand clutching Bea's skirts as her wide grey eyes tried to take in the overwhelming spectacle. With every step, Bea was acutely aware that she was destroying the illusion of her own death. With every step, she was dragging scandal into Winterbourne's hallowed halls. With every step, she was moving closer to the only man she had ever loved, and the elegant stranger who now wore his ring. She stopped 10 feet from Nathaniel. Any closer, and she feared her composure would shatter entirely. Up close, she could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the fine lines at the corners of his mouth that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to sleep peacefully. "Your Grace." Bea's voice emerged clear despite the chaos in her chest. She dropped into a curtsy, pulling Charlotte down with her. When she rose, she met his eyes directly. "Forgive the intrusion." Nathaniel said nothing. He stood frozen, his expression cycling through emotions too quickly for her to name. Shock, confusion, something that might have been fury or might have been relief. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Beatrice." Her name came out hoarse, barely above a whisper, as if he were testing whether speaking it aloud would make her vanish like morning mist. Helena's tinkling laugh cut through the tension. "Your Grace, surely this is some mistake. Lady Beatrice Ashworth perished in a carriage accident 3 years ago. The whole county mourned her." Her voice dripped with sympathy that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "This woman must be an impostor seeking to take advantage of—" "I assure you, Lady Carrington, I am no impostor." Bea kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. "Though I understand why my appearance might seem impossible. Impossible doesn't begin to describe it." Nathaniel finally found his voice, and the controlled fury in it made Bea want to step backward, but she held her ground. "You were dead. We searched the wreckage. We found your—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "We found enough evidence to hold a memorial service. I stood at an empty grave and—" Again he cut himself off, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "I survived." The words felt inadequate for 3 years of suffering, but they were all Bea had. "The carriage went over the embankment. I was thrown clear before it caught fire. When I woke, I was in a cottage miles from anywhere, cared for by a farmer's wife who found me half frozen in her barn. It wasn't entirely a lie. She'd been found half frozen, though not in a barn, and not by any farmer's wife. The truth was more complicated, more shameful, and entirely impossible to speak aloud in a ballroom full of London's elite. "Why?" Nathaniel's voice broke. He drew a breath, visibly fighting for composure. "Why did you never send a word? Why let us all believe you were dead? Because when I finally recovered enough to travel, you were already the Duke. Because your brother had died and you'd inherited everything you'd never wanted. Because I was carrying your child and terrified of what admitting that would do to you. Because I read about your engagement to Lady Carrington and understood with perfect clarity that there was no place for me in your new life. I was injured, B said instead. It took months to recover. By that time I was well enough to travel. She let the sentence trail off, unable to complete the lie or speak the full truth. Helena's laugh was sharper now, edged with something dangerous. How very convenient. You appear now, just as the Duke is to be married. One might almost think the timing was deliberate. One might think many things, Lady Carrington. That doesn't make them true. Helena's eyes narrowed. Before she could respond, Nathaniel stepped forward abruptly, closing the distance between himself and B, until she could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something darker, something that belonged only to him. And the child? His voice was low, meant only for her ears, but in the deathly silence of the ballroom it carried. His gaze dropped to Charlotte, who had been mostly hidden behind B's skirts. Who is she? This was the moment, the precipice. B could feel the weight of every eye in the room, could hear the collective intake of breath as society waited to see what scandal would unfold. She looked down at Charlotte, who gazed up at Nathaniel with innocent curiosity, unaware that she was the living proof of everything B had tried to hide. This is Charlotte. B's hand tightened protectively on the child's shoulder. My daughter. You're... Nathaniel's face went white. He stared at Charlotte as if seeing her for the first time, and B watched understanding dawn in his eyes, the grey irises that were mirror images of his own. The determined set of her small jaw was pure Thornfield stubbornness. The dark curls that came from B, but the shape of her face, the elegant arch of her brows, the way she tilted her head when curious, all of it unmistakably his. How old is she? The question emerged strangled. 3 years. B met his eyes without flinching. This past November, she watched him calculate. 3 years old, born November of 1846, conceived in January of 1846. 1 month before the accident that had supposedly killed her. 1 month after the night they'd spent together in the hunting lodge, when winter storms had stranded them and torn apart every careful rule of propriety they'd tried to maintain. The night he'd whispered promises against her skin. The night she'd believed they would find a way to be together, despite his family's objections to her modest background. The night that had created the child now clinging to B's skirts. No, the word was barely a breath. Nathaniel took a step backward as if she'd struck him. That's not... You can't... I can, B said softly. And I am. The ballroom erupted. Whispers became exclamations. Women gasped behind fans. Men muttered about scandal and deception. Helena's face transformed from serene to furious in the space of a heartbeat. This is absurd. Helena's voice cut through the chaos. Your Grace, surely you're not going to entertain this woman's obvious lies. She appears after 3 years with a convenient child and expects us to believe. Look at her. B's voice emerged stronger than she'd thought possible. She pulled Charlotte forward gently, positioning her where the candlelight fell fully across her small face. Anyone with eyes can see the truth. And it was true. The resemblance was undeniable. Charlotte had B's colouring, the dark auburn hair, the pale skin scattered with freckles. But everything else was Nathaniel. The shape of her eyes, the line of her nose, the way her mouth curved when she smiled. She was a perfect blend of them both, living proof of a love affair that society had never known existed. Nathaniel stared at Charlotte as if the world had tilted sideways. His chest rose and fell with laboured breaths. His hands trembled before he clenched them at his sides. When he finally looked back at B, his eyes held a maelstrom of emotions, fury, betrayal, wonder, denial, and beneath it all, something that looked dangerously close to hope. We need to speak, he said, his voice rough. Privately, now. Your Grace, Helena began, her hand reaching for his arm. Not now, Helena. Nathaniel's tone brooked no argument. He turned to the assembled crowd, his ducal mask sliding back into place with visible effort. The ball will continue. Please, enjoy yourselves. The orchestra, which had fallen silent during the drama, resumed playing with visible relief. Conversation returned in hushed, fevered bursts. No one was actually dancing or eating or doing anything but watching as Nathaniel gestured curtly toward a side corridor. Bea gathered Charlotte against her side and followed, acutely aware of Helena's furious stare boring into her back. Behind them, the whispers rose like a tide that would soon drown them all. Nathaniel led them through a maze of corridors until he reached a heavy oak door. He threw it open without ceremony, revealing a study-lined floor-to-ceiling with books. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across leather furniture and rich carpet. The scent of old paper and wood smoke was achingly familiar. This had been his father's study once, in the days when Nathaniel was simply the spare, free to spend his afternoons with the quiet daughter of a minor baronet, who shared his love of books and philosophical arguments. He closed the door behind them with a firm click, then leaned against it, as if he needed its support to remain standing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence pressed down with suffocating weight. "Is this a joke?" Nathaniel's voice was barely controlled. "Some cosmic jest designed to destroy what little sanity I have left? I assure you I find nothing amusing about any of this." Bea kept her voice low, aware of Charlotte pressed against her legs, the child's earlier confidence evaporating in the face of this stranger's obvious distress. 3 years. He pushed off from the door and began pacing like a caged animal. 3 years, Beatrice. I mourned you. I stood at your empty grave and felt something inside me die because you were gone, and I never... He stopped abruptly, running both hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "And all this time you were alive. You were alive and you never sent a word. You let me believe you were dead while you..." His eyes cut to Charlotte. "While you were raising my child." "Our child," Bea corrected softly. "Did I have any part in her life? Any knowledge of her existence? Any choice in the matter?" His fury was cold, controlled, and far more frightening than shouting would have been. "No. So forgive me if I don't feel terribly paternal at the moment." The words struck like physical blows. Bea felt Charlotte shrink against her, and fury rose hot in her chest. "Keep your voice down. You're frightening her." Nathaniel's gaze dropped to the child, his daughter, and something in his expression cracked. He drew a shaking breath and visibly forced himself to calm. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. "Why?" The single word held 3 years of anguish. "Why didn't you come to me when you discovered you were carrying my child? Why let me believe you were dead?" "Because I was terrified. Because I woke in a stranger's cottage 3 days after the accident with my body broken and my mind clouded with pain. And when I realized I was pregnant, I knew I had 2 choices. Return to you in disgrace, unwed and carrying your bastard, destroying both our reputations, or disappear and raise her alone. Because by the time I recovered enough to think clearly, your brother had died and you'd become the Duke. Because I read about your engagement to Lady Carrington and understood that you'd moved on to a life that had no room for the inconvenient mistakes of your past. Because I loved you enough to let you go." "The accident," Bea began carefully, choosing each word like stepping stones across treacherous water. "I was thrown from the carriage before it went into the gorge. A farmer found me half dead in the woods 3 days later. By the time I woke, I was miles from anywhere, with no money, no connections, and no way to send a word. The farmer's wife who cared for me was kind, but she was isolated from society. She had no idea who I was. But eventually you recovered. Eventually, you must have been able to travel. Yes, months later, when I was strong enough, She paused, the lie sticking in her throat. The truth threatened to spill out. That she'd made her way to a distant cousin's house. That she'd given birth there in secret. That she'd spent months recovering while Charlotte grew from infant to toddler. That by the time she dared to look for news of the world she'd left behind, everything had changed. By then, I'd read of your brother's death, your inheritance of the dukedom, your engagement. Nathaniel went very still. "So you stayed away because I was engaged." "I stayed away because I had no right to destroy your future for a single night's mistake." "Mistake?" He repeated the word as if tasting poison. Is that what Charlotte is to you? A mistake? No! The denial burst out before Bea could stop it. She's the only good thing that came from 3 years of hell. But I believed. Her voice cracked. You were building a new life. You'd become everything your father wanted. You had Lady Carrington, perfect and suitable, and exactly what a duke needs. What right did I have to appear like a ghost and demand you acknowledge a child born out of wedlock? What right did I have to destroy you? So instead you chose to erase yourself, to let me believe you were dead, to raise my daughter alone while I... He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard she could see the muscle jump. Do you have any idea what these 3 years have been like? Knowing I never told you how I felt. Knowing you died believing I cared more about my family's expectations than I did about you. The raw pain in his voice made Bea's eyes burn with unshed tears. I know, because I lived them too, believing you'd moved on and forgotten me. Forgotten you. He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. I have spent 3 years trying to forget you and failing spectacularly. I agreed to marry Helena because my mother insisted the line needed securing and I was too hollow inside to care whom I married. At least Helena understood it would be a marriage of convenience. At least she never expected me to love her. Bea's breath caught. Nathaniel. No. He held up a hand, stopping her. You don't get to say my name like that. Not after 3 years of silence. Not after keeping my daughter from me. I was trying to protect you. I didn't need protection! His control finally snapped, voice rising. I needed you. I needed to know you were alive. I needed... He stopped abruptly, his eyes cutting to Charlotte. The child had remained quiet throughout their confrontation, pressed against Bea's legs. But now she was staring up at Nathaniel with wide, solemn eyes. When she spoke, her voice was small but clear. Are you angry at Mama? Nathaniel seemed to see her, truly see her, for the first time. The fury drained from his face, replaced by something more complicated. He sank down onto one knee, bringing himself to Charlotte's eye level, though he maintained careful distance as if afraid she might bolt. I'm not angry at your mama, he said, his voice gentling in a way that made Bea's throat tight. I'm confused, and I don't understand what's happening, but I'm not angry at her, and I'm certainly not angry at you. Charlotte studied him with the serious intensity only small children could manage. Mama says you're a duke. That's very important. It is, Nathaniel agreed. Though right now, I think talking to you might be more important than anything else. Do you live here, in this big house? I do. It's very pretty. There are so many candles. Charlotte paused, then added with perfect childhood logic, but it must be hard to clean. Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lip. The maids certainly think so. Charlotte considered this, then asked the question that made Bea's heart stop. Mama says I have a papa who lives far away. Are you him? The silence that followed felt eternal. Bea watched Nathaniel's face work through a dozen emotions before settling on something raw, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. I don't know how to answer that, little. That's something your mama and I need to discuss. But his eyes, when they lifted to meet Bea's over Charlotte's head, held a truth he hadn't spoken aloud. The question wasn't whether he was Charlotte's father. The resemblance made that undeniable. The question was whether he would claim her, whether he could forgive Bea enough to acknowledge a daughter born in scandal. A sharp knock at the study door shattered the moment. Before anyone could respond, the door opened, and Helena swept in like an avenging angel, her silver gown glittering with righteous fury. Nathaniel, this has gone on quite long enough. Her voice was ice wrapped in silk. You're embarrassing yourself. This woman appears with a convenient child, and a story designed to... Helena. Nathaniel rose to his full height, his expression hardening back into ducal authority. This is neither the time nor place. On the contrary, I believe it's exactly the time. Helena's eyes cut to Bea with undisguised venom. The entire ballroom is speculating wildly. Your mother is beside herself, and you're hiding away with a stranger who claims, Lady Beatrice is not a stranger. Nathaniel's voice could have frozen fire. And I would advise you to choose your next words very carefully. Helena's mouth thinned into a hard line. So you're going to legitimize this farce? Accept this child as yours based on nothing more than a resemblance and a story? The resemblance is rather difficult to deny. Children can resemble anyone if you're looking for similarities. This woman has clearly manipulated you, taking advantage of your grief over her supposed death to… Enough! The single word cracked like a whip. You will not speak of Lady Beatrice in such terms. You will not question my judgment. And you will remember that you are a guest in my home. Helena drew herself up, her beautiful features twisting with fury. A guest. I am your fiancé. We are to be married in 3 weeks. I have every right to… You have the rights I grant you, and no more. Nathaniel's voice was implacable. I will deal with this situation as I see fit. You will return to the ballroom and inform my mother I will join the company shortly. For a moment, Bea thought Helena might refuse. The woman's hands clenched at her sides, her chest heaving with barely suppressed rage. But apparently, even in her fury, she recognized the danger in defying a duke in his own home. As you wish, Your Grace. The title emerged dripping with sarcasm. Helena executed a mocking curtsy, then swept toward the door. But she paused on the threshold, her eyes finding Bea's. Enjoy your moment of triumph, Lady Beatrice. It will be brief. The Duke may be momentarily swayed by sentiment and a child's pretty face, but society has rules for a reason. Women like you, women who appear from nowhere with bastards in tow, don't get happy endings. You get exactly what you deserve. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Charlotte whimpered and pressed closer to Bea. Mama, that lady was mean. Hush, sweetheart. It's all right. Bea's arms tightened around her daughter, even as her eyes met Nathaniel's across the space between them. He looked tired suddenly, older than his 30 years, worn down by responsibility and grief, and now this impossible situation. She's not wrong about society's rules, he said quietly. This will be a scandal, unlike anything Winterbourne has seen. I know. Bea's voice was steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. I wouldn't have come if I had any other choice. What choice? His brows drew together. What drove you here tonight, Beatrice? Why now, after 3 years of silence? This was it. The moment to reveal the truth that had finally forced her hand. Bea drew a shaking breath and met his eyes. Because someone is trying to take Charlotte from me, and you're the only person in the world with enough power to stop them. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathaniel went very still, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning understanding, to cold fury in the space of a heartbeat. Explain, he said, and the Duke of Winterbourne had never sounded more dangerous. Now. Bea tightened her arms around Charlotte and began to speak, unraveling the truth she'd hidden for 3 years. Outside, snow continued to fall over Winterbourne Manor, blanketing the world in white that hid nothing but revealed everything too clearly. Inside, in a study that smelled of old leather and older secret, a ghost reclaimed her life one painful word at a time, and a man discovered that the woman he'd mourned had never truly left him at all. She'd simply been waiting for the moment when staying away became more dangerous than returning. And that moment had finally come. 3 years ago, in the depths of winter, Lady Beatrice Ashworth had vanished into tragedy. Tonight, she stood before Nathaniel Thornfield with their daughter between them and forced him to see what everyone else had missed. That love didn't die when the body did, that secrets had consequences that echoed through time, and that some truths refused to stay buried, no matter how deep you tried to bury them. The only question was whether the truth would save them or destroy what little remained of the life they had together. Bea's voice was steady, despite the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. After the accident, I made my way to my mother's distant cousin in Somerset, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a widow with a small estate and fewer questions than most. I told her I'd been travelling and fallen ill, nothing more. She took me in, asked no questions, and when I discovered I was pregnant, she swallowed hard. I told her the father had died, that I was grieving and needed sanctuary. Nathaniel listened without interruption, his face carved from stone. Charlotte was born in November of that year. For 2 years, we lived quietly. I helped Eleanor with her household accounts, taught reading to the village children, and tried to convince myself we were safe, that we could simply disappear into obscurity and build a new life. What changed? Nathaniel's voice was carefully neutral. Eleanor died 4 months ago. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. Her estate passed to a nephew, Mr. Gerald Hartwell, a man of questionable character and mounting debts. B's hands tightened protectively on Charlotte's shoulders. He discovered my situation within weeks. A woman living under his aunt's roof with no clear background, no family connections, and a child of suspicious origins. And he saw an opportunity. He saw blackmail. The bitterness in B's voice was acid sharp. He demanded to know Charlotte's parentage. When I refused to answer, he began making threats. Said he would petition the courts to have Charlotte removed from my care, that an unwed mother of no means and no family was unfit to raise a child. He offered me a choice: sign over guardianship of Charlotte to him in exchange for a modest annual stipend, or fight him in court and lose everything. Nathaniel's eyes had gone cold as winter stone. He wanted to take your daughter, my daughter, your daughter. B met his gaze directly. He discovered through some investigation that I'd once moved in society, that I'd been declared dead. He's clever enough to have pieced together that Charlotte's father must be someone of means, someone who might pay handsomely to avoid scandal. He plans to use her as leverage to extract money from whoever he can prove fathered her. So you came here to what? Confess everything before he could expose it? I came here because the alternative was watching him take Charlotte and use her as a pawn in whatever scheme he's concocted. I came here because you're the only person with the power and position to protect her from men like Gerald Hartwell. I came here because... Her voice broke. Because I've spent 3 years trying to keep her safe alone, and I can't do it anymore. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. Charlotte had grown heavy against B's side, exhausted by the long journey and the emotional weight she didn't fully understand. She yawned widely, then looked up at Nathaniel with sleepy curiosity. "Sir? Are you truly a duke?" The question seemed to catch Nathaniel off guard. His expression softened fractionally as he looked at the child. His child. "I am." "And do dukes have power? Like in the stories Mama reads to me?" "Some power, yes." Charlotte considered this with the serious deliberation of a 3-year-old. "Then perhaps you could help us. Mama is very sad about the bad man who wants to take me away. I don't want to go with him. He smells like old tobacco and says mean things." Something shifted in Nathaniel's face. The anger didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, a fierce protectiveness that flickered to life in his eyes as he looked at Charlotte. "No one is taking you anywhere," he said, and the certainty in his voice made it sound like a vow. "I promise you that." Charlotte smiled sleepily. "Good. Mama worries so much. It makes her cry sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep." B felt heat flood her cheeks. "Charlotte, that's enough." "But it's true, Mama. You do cry." Nathaniel's eyes found B's, and the raw emotion in them made her breath catch. "Yes," he said softly. "I imagine she does." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Nathaniel straightened, his ducal mask sliding back into place. "Enter." An elderly butler stepped inside, his expression professionally neutral despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess requests your presence. There are matters that require your attention." "Tell my mother I'll join her shortly. She was quite insistent, Your Grace. Something about controlling the narrative before rumours spread beyond our ability to contain them." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Of course she was." He turned back to B. "We're not finished discussing this, but my mother is right. We need to address the situation before society devours us all. Can you wait here?" It wasn't really a question. B nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "We have nowhere else to go." Something flickered in his expression. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. "I'll have Mrs. Thornbury prepare rooms for you, both of you. You'll stay here at Winterbourne until this situation is resolved. Nathaniel, I can't impose. You're not imposing. You're... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You're the mother of my child. That grants you certain protections, whether we're on good terms or not. And Charlotte, his voice softened as he looked at the drowsing little girl. She deserves better than to be used as a pawn by ambitious men. I'll see to it she's protected. Thank you, Bea whispered. He nodded once, then turned and left, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Bea sank into a leather chair, Charlotte immediately curling into her lap. The child was asleep within moments, her small body warm and trusting against Bea's chest. Alone in the study, surrounded by books that had once been her refuge, Bea finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd just done. She'd returned from the dead. She'd revealed Charlotte's existence. She'd shattered Nathaniel's engagement and thrown Winterbourne into chaos. And she'd put her fate entirely in the hands of a man who had every right to despise her for the choices she'd made. Outside, she could hear the distant murmur of voices, the ball continuing despite the scandal, society's relentless machinery churning forward, regardless of individual tragedy. Helena's words echoed in her memory. Women like you don't get happy endings. You get exactly what you deserve. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps this had been a terrible mistake. Perhaps she should have found another way, any other way to protect Charlotte from Gerald Hartwell's machinations. But as she held her sleeping daughter and breathed in the scent of Nathaniel's study, old leather and wood smoke and memory, Bea couldn't quite bring herself to regret returning. Whatever happened next, at least Charlotte would be safe. At least Nathaniel would finally know the truth. And perhaps, if she was very fortunate, he might someday understand why she'd made the choices she had. It was a small hope, but it was all she had. The door opened again, this time admitting a stern-faced woman in an immaculate housekeeper's dress. Lady Beatrice, I'm Mrs. Thornbury. His Grace has instructed me to prepare the blue suite for you and the child. If you'll follow me. Bea stood carefully, adjusting Charlotte in her arms. The child stirred, but didn't wake. Thank you, Mrs. Thornbury. The housekeeper's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were kind as they rested briefly on Charlotte. This way, my Tams. The blue suite was more luxurious than anywhere Bea had lived in 3 years. The bedroom was spacious, with a 4-poster bed draped in sapphire silk. An adjoining nursery held a smaller bed, already made up with fresh linens. A fire burned cheerfully in both hearths, driving away the winter chill. The Duke has asked that you rest tonight, Mrs. Thornbury said, as Bea laid Charlotte gently on the nursery bed. He'll speak with you in the morning, after he's addressed certain complications, a generous word for an engagement shattered and a scandal that would echo through society for years. Is there anything you require, my lady? Bea looked down at her worn travelling dress, suddenly acutely aware of how shabby she must appear in these elegant surroundings. Perhaps something for Charlotte to wear tomorrow, and if it's not too much trouble, a simple morning dress for myself. Mrs. Thornbury's expression softened infinitesimally. I'll see what can be arranged, my lady. The previous Duchess was approximately your size. I'm certain something suitable can be found. After the housekeeper departed, Bea removed Charlotte's shoes and cloak, then covered her with a warm blanket. The child sighed in her sleep, one small hand curling against her cheek. She looked so peaceful, so innocent of the storm her existence had unleashed. Bea stood watching her daughter sleep for a long time, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the dark lashes against pale skin, the rise and fall of her small chest. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever Nathaniel decided, at least Charlotte had slept one night in safety. At least for a few hours, they were protected by the Duke of Winterbourne's authority and the thick walls of his ancestral home. It was more than they'd had in months. Bea finally moved to the bedroom, intending only to rest for a moment, but exhaustion claimed her the instant she lay down, pulling her into dreamless sleep before she could even remove her shoes. Nathaniel stood in his mother's private sitting room, and wished desperately for something stronger than the tea she was pouring with precise, controlled movement. Lavinia Thornfield, Dowager Duchess of Winterbourne, was a small woman with steel in her spine and ice in her blue eyes that were currently fixed on her son with a mixture of concern and calculation. "So," she said, handing him a cup he had no intention of drinking, "Lady Beatrice Ashworth has returned from the dead with a child who is quite obviously yours. I assume you have a plan for managing this disaster?" "Mother, I discovered her existence approximately an hour ago. I haven't had time to develop a comprehensive strategy." "Then you'd better develop one quickly. Helena's mother is currently in the ballroom spreading poison about Lady Beatrice's character. By morning, half of London will believe she's either an imposter or a scheming fortune hunter who trapped you 3 years ago and now seeks to capitalize on your position." Nathaniel's hand tightened around the teacup. "What does Helena say?" "Helena is maintaining admirable composure considering her fiancé has just been presented with a living, breathing reminder of a past liaison. She's suggesting that you verify the child's parentage before making any rash decisions." Lavinia paused. "It's not unreasonable advice. The child looks exactly like me. Many children resemble people they're not related to, and Lady Beatrice was declared legally dead. Her sudden resurrection raises questions about her activities for the past 3 years. For all you know, she could have married someone else, had his child, and now seeks to claim it as yours for the financial security your name provides. She wouldn't do that. How would you know? You haven't seen her in 3 years. People change, Nathaniel. Desperation changes them even more dramatically." He wanted to argue, to defend Bee's character with the certainty he'd once felt. But his mother was right about one thing. He didn't know what Bee had endured in the years since the accident. He didn't know what she might have become in the crucible of survival, except he'd seen her face when she spoke of being found half dead in the woods. He'd heard the tremor in her voice when she explained about Gerald Hartwell's threats, and he'd watched her hold Charlotte with a fierce protectiveness that spoke of genuine love, not calculation. "What do you suggest I do?" he asked, hating the defeat in his own voice. "First, discover the truth. Hire investigators to verify her story, where she's been, how she's lived, whether the child is genuinely yours. Second, speak with Helena. She deserves honesty about your intentions. Third," Lavinia paused, her expression softening fractionally. "Third, decide what you actually want, not what's proper or expected or politically advantageous, but what would make you happy. Then pursue it without apology." Nathaniel looked at his mother in surprise. "That's remarkably progressive advice coming from you. I may value propriety, but I value your happiness more. And you've been miserable since Lady Beatrice died. If there's a chance that her return could restore some portion of what you lost, then perhaps scandal is a price worth paying." She set down her teacup with a decisive click. "Now, about Helena. I'll speak with her first thing in the morning. Tonight would be better. Mother, it's nearly midnight. The woman I thought was dead has returned with my daughter. Helena can wait until morning." Lavinia's lips thinned, but she nodded. "As you wish. But Nathaniel, whatever you decide, do it quickly. The longer this situation remains unresolved, the more damage it will do to everyone involved." He left his mother's sitting room and returned to the now empty ballroom. The guests had departed, taking their gossip with them like stolen treasure. Servants moved efficiently through the space, snuffing candles and collecting abandoned glasses. The Christmas tree stood sentinel in the corner, its decorations glittering in the dying light. Nathaniel walked to the spot where he'd been standing when Bee appeared. He could still see her as she'd looked in that first moment, pale and determined, holding a child's hand, looking at him as if he held her entire world in his keeping. And perhaps he did. She'd said he was the only one with enough power to protect Charlotte from Gerald Hartwell's schemes. She'd returned not because she wanted to disrupt his life, but because staying away had become impossible. That should have made him angry. It should have felt like manipulation, like she was using their daughter as a tool to claim protection she hadn't earned. Instead, it made him want to find Gerald Hartwell and demonstrate exactly what happened to men who threatened a duke's child. Because Charlotte was his, he knew it with bone-deep certainty that it had nothing to do with resemblance and everything to do with the way his heart had contracted when she'd asked if he was her papa. The way something had shifted in his chest when she'd smiled at him with grave curiosity. His daughter, 3 years old, with Bee's colouring and his eyes, and he'd missed every moment of her life thus far. The fury that had been simmering since Bee's revelation suddenly crystallized into cold purpose. Tomorrow, he will begin untangling this mess. He would verify Bee's story, not because he doubted her, but because his mother was right. Society would demand proof. He would deal with Helena and the wreckage of their engagement. He would hunt down Gerald Hartwell and ensure the man never threatened Charlotte again. But tonight, he would do something he'd been unable to do for 3 years. He would sleep, knowing Beatrice Ashworth was alive and under his roof, and that whatever had broken between them might yet be mended. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to carry him through the dark. Bee woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting sensation of silk sheets against her skin. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory crashed back. Winterbourne, the ball, Nathaniel's fury and confusion, Helena's venom, Charlotte. Bee shot upright, heart racing, then sagged with relief as she heard the child's voice drifting from the nursery. She was singing to herself, some nonsense song about snowflakes and rabbits. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Thornbury's entrance. The housekeeper carried a tray laden with breakfast and wore an expression of professional neutrality. "Good morning, Lady Beatrice. I trust you slept well?" "Yes, thank you." Bee pushed tangled hair from her face, acutely aware of how she must look, rumpled and wearing yesterday's dress. "Is Charlotte?" "The child is perfectly well. A maid is with her. His Grace has requested your presence in his study at your earliest convenience." Of course he had. Bee's stomach knotted with anxiety. "I'll need to dress first." Naturally, Mrs. Thornbury moved to an armoire and extracted a morning dress in soft grey wool, simple but elegant, clearly expensive. "This belonged to the late Duchess. I believe it will suit you well enough." The late Duchess. Nathaniel's mother died 5 years ago. Bee remembered her vaguely, a kind woman who had always treated the quiet baronet's daughter with gentle courtesy. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornbury." The housekeeper nodded and withdrew, leaving Bee to wash and dress with trembling hands. The grey wool fit nearly perfectly, requiring only minor adjustments. It felt strange to wear such fine clothing again after 3 years of shabby hand-me-downs. Charlotte bounced into the room just as Bee finished pinning her hair. "Mama, look what the maid gave me." She held up a rag doll with yellow yarn hair. "Her name is Betsy. She's lovely, darling." Bee knelt to straighten Charlotte's dress, a simple blue frock that fit far better than her usual worn garments. "Did you thank the maid?" "Yes, Mamma, and I ate all my breakfast like a good girl." "Excellent." Bee's heart clenched with love and fear in equal measure. "Now, sweetheart, I need to go speak with the Duke. Can you stay here with the maid for a little while?" Charlotte's small face scrunched with worry. "Will he still help us? Is he still angry?" "I don't know, darling. But whatever happens, I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you. Do you trust me?" "Always, Mamma." Bee kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, then forced herself to stand and walk toward whatever awaited in Nathaniel's study. He was standing by the window when she entered, silhouetted against the snow-bright morning. He'd changed from his evening clothes into riding attire, and his dark hair was damp, as if he'd recently bathed. He didn't turn as she closed the door behind her. "Did you sleep?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Yes. Thank you for the accommodations. They were far more generous than necessary. Generous would be believing your story without question. I'm being practical." He finally turned to face her, and the exhaustion in his features made guilt twist in her chest. "I've sent inquiries to Somerset regarding Gerald Hartwell. I expect responses within 2 days." I've also dispatched investigators to verify the details of your story. The farmer who found you, the cottage where you recovered, Mrs. Hartwell's estate, and her nephew's character. Bea felt her shoulders tense. You don't believe me. I believe that you believe what you're telling me. But I'm a duke, Beatrice. I can't make decisions based solely on emotion, particularly decisions that will affect my family's reputation for generations. I need proof. Charlotte is your proof. Anyone with eyes can see. Resemblance isn't proof. It's a suggestion. He moved to his desk and extracted a folder, which he opened to reveal several documents. However, I'm not without resources. This is a copy of the carriage accident report from 3 years ago. It confirms you were travelling alone to visit your mother's cousin in Somerset when the accident occurred. Your body was never recovered, but personal effects were found in the wreckage, enough to declare you legally dead. He pulled out another paper. This is a letter from Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, written to my mother 2 years ago, mentioning in passing that she'd taken in a distant relation who'd fallen on difficult times. The timing corresponds with your story, a third document. And this is a property record showing that Eleanor Hartwell's estate passed to Gerald Hartwell 4 months ago, just as you claimed. Bea's throat tightened. You investigated overnight. I have people who work very quickly when properly motivated. He closed the folder. Your story holds up thus far, but that doesn't prove Charlotte is mine. How can you look at her and doubt it? I don't doubt it. I'm telling you what society will say, what Helena's family is already saying. He raked a hand through his hair in frustration. Do you have any idea what you've done to my engagement? Helena's father is threatening to sue for breach of promise. Her mother is spreading rumors that you're a fortune hunter who's trained a child to impersonate my offspring. And half the ton is laying odds on whether I'll acknowledge Charlotte or cast you both out to protect my reputation. Bea felt cold seep into her bones. I didn't come here to destroy your life. Then why did you come? And don't say it was only about Gerald Hartwell. You could have sent me a letter, contacted my solicitor, found any number of ways to ask for help, without appearing dramatically at a Christmas ball with our daughter in tow. The question hung between them, sharp as a blade. Bea drew a shaking breath. Because I needed you to see her, to see us together. Because a letter could be ignored or dismissed. But Charlotte standing before you with your eyes in her face, that couldn't be denied. Because I was terrified that if I approached this any other way, you'd find a reason to turn us away to protect your precious reputation and your perfect fiancé. Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. Because I've spent 3 years alone and frightened, and I needed you to understand what that cost me, what it cost us. Nathaniel went very still. You think I would have turned away my own child? I think you're a duke now. I think you have responsibilities and expectations that didn't exist when we were just Nathaniel and Beatrice, sneaking away to read philosophy in the library and pretending we didn't know what everyone else did, that a match between us was impossible. I think you're engaged to a woman who fits your world perfectly, and I'm a ghost who refuses to stay buried. Tears burned in her eyes. So yes, I think there's a very real possibility you would have found it easier to deny Charlotte's existence than to acknowledge her. Then you don't know me at all. His voice was low, dangerous. Whatever else has changed, whatever title I wear or responsibilities I carry, I would never abandon my child. Never. How was I supposed to know that? You never told me how you felt before I died. You never said... She stopped, horrified at what she'd almost revealed. I never said what? Bea shook her head, stepping backward. It doesn't matter. It clearly does. He moved toward her with predatory grace. Finish the sentence, Beatrice. What did I never say? That you loved me. The words burst out before she could stop them. You never said you loved me. You never said I was anything more than a pleasant diversion, a friend you enjoyed spending time with. When we spent that night together at the hunting lodge, you held me and made promises about finding a way to be together, but you never once said the words. And then I died, and you grieved, and I thought perhaps you'd cared. But then I returned from the dead to find you engaged to someone else, and I understood that whatever we had, it wasn't strong enough to survive my absence. Nathaniel stared at her as if she'd struck him. You think I didn't love you? I think you cared for me. I think you enjoyed my company. I think for one night, we gave into something we'd both wanted. But love, the kind of love that survives death and scandal and 3 years of silence, I don't know if what we had was that. Then let me be perfectly clear. He closed the remaining distance between them, his eyes blazing with emotion she couldn't name. I loved you. I've loved you since you were 17 and argued with me about Aristotle's ethics in my father's library. I loved you when we danced at your debut and you stepped on my feet 3 times because you were nervous. I loved you when we spent that night together and you looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And I loved you when I stood at your empty grave and wished I'd told you before it was too late. Bee's breath caught in her throat. Nathaniel, I agreed to marry Helena because I was hollow inside and my mother needed me to produce an heir. Because love was something I'd had once and lost, and I didn't believe I'd ever feel it. Because Helena understood it would be a marriage of convenience, and she never asked me for something I couldn't give. He cupped Bee's face with both hands, his touch achingly gentle despite the intensity in his voice. But you came back. You walked into my ballroom like a ghost made flesh, and every wall I'd built came crashing down. So no, Beatrice, you don't get to doubt whether I loved you. The question is whether you loved me enough to believe we could have found a way through this mess if you trusted me 3 years ago. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Bee felt tears spill over, hot against her cheeks. I was terrified. I was alone and pregnant and legally dead, and you were a duke with responsibilities, and I would have given up all of it to keep. His voice cracked. My title, my position, every expectation society placed on me. I would have thrown it all away if you'd given me the chance, but you didn't. You made the choice for both of us, decided I was better off without you, and condemned us both to 3 years of misery. I was trying to protect you. I didn't need protection. I needed you. The words echoed in the study like thunder. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Nathaniel released her abruptly and stepped back, running both hands through his hair. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough. That was unfair. You did what you thought was right. You were trying to survive and protect our daughter. I shouldn't blame you for making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Bee hugged herself, suddenly cold despite the fire burning in the heart. What happens now? Now? Nathaniel laughed without humor. Now I will explain to my fiancé why I'm breaking our engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. Then I'll face my mother's disappointment and society's censure. After that, I'll acknowledge Charlotte publicly as my daughter and dare anyone to question her legitimacy to my face. And finally, if you're willing, we'll find a way to build something honest from this disaster. Something honest. He turned to face her fully, his expression raw and unguarded. I won't lie to you, Beatrice. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm furious that you kept Charlotte from me for 3 years. But I'm also, he paused, seeming to search for words. I'm overwhelmingly relieved that you're alive, that our daughter exists, that I have a chance, however slim, to have the family I thought I'd lost forever. Nathaniel, I don't expect. I'm not making declarations or demands. I'm saying that we have a daughter who needs both her parents. We have a situation that requires careful management to protect her from scandal. And we have whatever this is between us. This complicated tangle of love and anger and grief and hope. We'll figure it out one step at a time. Can you accept that? It was more than Bee had dared hope for. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. He moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. I'll arrange for you and Charlotte to have proper rooms, new clothes, everything you need. You'll attend dinner with me tonight so the staff sees me treating you with respect. And tomorrow, we'll begin the process of legitimizing Charlotte's position. Thank you. He shook his head. Don't thank me for doing what should have been done from the start. If I'd been braver 3 years ago, if I'd declared my intentions despite my family's objections, none of this would have happened. You can't know that. I know that I let you walk out of my life without fighting for you. I know that I let society's expectations matter more than my own happiness. I won't make that mistake again. His eyes held hers with fierce intensity. Whatever happens between us romantically, Charlotte will have her father. You have my word on that. After he left, Bea sank into a chair and let herself cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally not being alone anymore. The confrontation with Helena occurred in the morning room, with winter sunlight streaming through tall windows and illuminating the fury in the lady's beautiful face. She'd arrived at Winterbourne at first light, demanding to see Nathaniel immediately. Now she stood rigid as a statue, her golden curls perfectly arranged, her morning dress a masterpiece of calculated elegance. "You're ending our engagement." It wasn't a question. Helena's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "Because of her. Because I can't marry you while my daughter exists." Nathaniel kept his tone even with effort. "It wouldn't be fair to any of us." "Fair?" Helena's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "You speak of fairness when you've publicly humiliated me, when you've made me a laughingstock by acknowledging a bastard child born from a liaison with a woman of no consequence. Lady Beatrice is the mother of my child. That makes her anything but inconsequential. She's a nobody who trapped you 3 years ago and now seeks to profit from your guilt." Helena's eyes glittered with venom. "Can't you see what she's doing? She appears like a phantom with a convenient child and a sob story designed to manipulate your sympathies, and you, like a fool, are giving her exactly what she wants. What she wants is protection for our daughter. I'm providing that, at the cost of everything we've built. Our engagement was announced. The wedding invitations have been sent. My family has made arrangements, spent money, and planned for our union. And you would throw it all away for a woman who's been presumed dead and a child whose parentage you can't even prove." "I can prove it." Nathaniel's voice hardened. "Charlotte is mine. Anyone who looks at her knows it." "Resemblance isn't proof." Helena's composure finally cracked, her voice rising. "I could find 12 children in London who resemble you if one looks hard enough. This woman has trained a child to—" "Enough!" The single word cracked like a whip. "You will not speak of Charlotte in such terms. She's 3 years old and innocent of whatever schemes you imagine. And Beatrice is not manipulating me. She's trying to protect her daughter from very real threats. Her daughter, not ours." Helena's beautiful face twisted with bitter triumph. "You haven't claimed the child as yours. You haven't acknowledged her, because somewhere in that stubborn head, you know the truth. This woman is using you. I haven't made a public acknowledgement yet because I'm trying to manage the scandal with minimal damage to all parties involved. But make no mistake, Helena, I will claim Charlotte. I will legitimize her position. And I will not marry a woman who speaks of my daughter with such contempt." Helena went very still. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled but shaking with suppressed rage. "So that's it. 3 years of courtship, an engagement your mother arranged, a wedding 3 weeks away, all discarded because a ghost returned with a convenient bastard. Call her that again, and this conversation is over. This conversation is already over." Helena drew herself up to her full height, every inch the offended aristocrat. "You're making a terrible mistake, Nathaniel. Worse, you're making it for a woman who abandoned you once and will do it again the moment something better comes along. But you won't see that, because you're blinded by sentiment and guilt. Or perhaps I simply love her." The words emerged quiet, but absolute. "Perhaps I've always loved her, and I made the mistake 3 years ago of not fighting for her when I should have. I won't make that error twice." Helena's eyes widened fractionally, the first real crack in her composure. "You love her." "I do. More than duty. More than your family's expectations. More than your position in society. Yes." The single word seemed to drain something vital from Helena. Her shoulders sagged infinitesimally before she straightened with visible effort. "Then there's nothing more to say. You've made your choice. I hope it brings you everything you imagine it will." She turned toward the door with precise, measured steps. But she paused on the threshold, looking back with an expression that held more pain than rage. For what it's worth, Nathaniel, I didn't expect to care when we agreed to marry. I thought it would be a practical arrangement, nothing more. But somewhere in 3 years of courtship, I developed genuine affection for you." Her smile was bitter. "How foolish of me to forget that your heart was buried with a woman who wasn't actually dead. I hope Lady Beatrice appreciates the gift you're giving her. Not every woman gets a second chance at the love she threw away." The door closed behind her with quiet finality, leaving Nathaniel alone with his thoughts and the weight of a decision that would echo through his life in ways he couldn't yet foresee. He'd chosen love over duty, scandal over propriety, an uncertain future with Beatrice and Charlotte over the safe, predictable life he'd been building with Helena. It should have felt reckless. Instead, it felt like the first honest decision he'd made since his brother died and thrust him into a title he'd never wanted. Nathaniel turned toward the window and watched snow begin to fall again over Winterbourne's grounds. Somewhere in this vast house, Beatrice was probably reading to Charlotte or playing some simple game to keep the child occupied. Somewhere, Helena was returning to her family with news that would ignite a fresh scandal. Somewhere, society was already sharpening its knives to dissect every aspect of this situation. But here, in this moment, Nathaniel allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of a man mourning his lost love, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd been given an impossible second chance and intended to seize it with both hands regardless of the cost. He had a daughter to claim, a woman to court, properly this time, without secrets or stolen moments, a scandal to weather, a future to build from the wreckage of the past 3 years. It would be difficult. Society would be merciless. There would be complications he couldn't yet anticipate. But Beatrice was alive, Charlotte existed, and love, which he'd thought buried forever, had proven more resilient than death or time or 3 years of misunderstanding. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. The days that followed were a peculiar blend of tension and unexpected domesticity. Nathaniel moved through his duties with mechanical precision, meeting with solicitors to handle the broken engagement, conferring with investigators about Gerald Hartwell, managing his mother's disapproval with quiet stubbornness. But his thoughts constantly returned to the blue suite where Beatrice and Charlotte had taken up residence. He found excuses to see them. Charlotte needed a physician to ensure she was healthy. Beatrice required fittings for proper gowns. They should join him for tea so the servants saw them treated with respect. Each visit brought new discoveries. Charlotte loved stories about knights and dragons. Beatrice still bit her lip when nervous. Their daughter had inherited both parents' love of books. A week after her dramatic return, Bea was summoned to Nathaniel's study again. She found him at his desk, surrounded by papers and looking grimmer than she'd seen since that first night. "The investigators have returned." He gestured to a chair. "You'll want to sit for this." Bea's stomach dropped as she sank into the indicated seat. "What did they find?" "Everything you told me was true. Gerald Hartwell is exactly the opportunistic bastard you described. But there's more." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "He's been making inquiries about Charlotte's parentage. He's discovered that you were last seen in London before your supposed death, that you were travelling alone to Somerset, and that the timing of Charlotte's birth suggests she was conceived before the accident. He's put together that her father must be someone from London society, someone with means and position. He's looking for you. He's looking for whoever can be blackmailed." Nathaniel tapped one of the papers. "My investigators intercepted correspondence between Hartwell and a private inquiry agent in London. They're searching for any hint of scandal involving you 3 years ago, any suggestion of impropriety that might point to Charlotte's father. Will they find anything? Not from me directly. We were discreet. But servants talk, Beatrice. Someone may remember that we spent time together. Someone may recall the night at the hunting lodge when the storm kept us there. It wouldn't take much to piece together the truth. Then let them." Bea lifted her chin. "Let them discover that Charlotte is yours. I'm tired of hiding. Are you prepared for what that means? The scandal won't just touch you. It will affect Charlotte for the rest of her life. She'll be known as my natural daughter, born out of wedlock. Some doors will forever be closed to her because of it. Those doors were already closed. Bee's voice was steady despite her fear. I'm a baronet's daughter with no dowry and a dead father. Charlotte was never going to move in the higher circles regardless of who her father is. But if you acknowledge her, at least she'll have your protection. Your name, even attached to scandal, is worth more than the alternative, which is Gerald Hartwell using her as a pawn until he extracts every penny he can from whoever he can convince is responsible for. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and moved to a sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour. He handed one to Bee. To scandal, then. He raised his glass in a mockery of a toast. May we weather it better than most. Bee clinked her glass against his and drank, the burn of the liquor providing momentary warmth against the cold fear in her chest. What happens now? Now I do what I should have done from the start. Nathaniel set down his glass with decisive force. I'm calling a meeting of my solicitors and advisors. I'll draft a legal document acknowledging Charlotte as my natural daughter. I'll establish a trust for her future. Ensure she has income and property regardless of what society thinks. And I'll make it clear that any attempt to use her for blackmail or profit will be met with the full force of the Winterbourne title and fortune. Nathaniel, that's the bare minimum I owe her, and you. He turned to face Bee fully. But there's something else I need to say. Something I should have said a week ago when you first returned. Bee's heart began to race. What is it? I don't just want to acknowledge Charlotte. I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I want us to try again, properly this time, without secrets or stolen moments. I want to court you, as I should have done 3 years ago. I want to give Charlotte a family, not just a father's name and protection. You want to court me. Bee's voice came out faint. While London is gossiping about my resurrection and your broken engagement and our illegitimate daughter, yes, that's mad, probably. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But I've discovered that the reasonable choices, marrying Helena, ignoring my heart, letting society dictate my life, led me to 3 years of misery. Perhaps madness will serve better. Bee set down her whiskey glass with shaking hand. Nathaniel, I'm not the girl you knew 3 years ago. I've changed. I've lived in poverty, raised a child alone, made choices you might not approve of. I'm harder now, less trusting, more cynical about the world and people's motives. I'm not the man I was either. I'm a duke who didn't want the title, carrying responsibilities I never asked for, and I've spent 3 years trying to be what everyone else needed instead of what I wanted to be. Perhaps we can figure out who we are now together. And if we discover we don't suit anymore, that the people we've become are incompatible, then at least we'll know. We'll have tried. Charlotte will still have both parents in her life, even if we're not together romantically. But Beatrice, he moved closer, his eyes intense. I don't believe that's what we'll find. I think beneath all the changes and scars and years of separation, we're still the same people who fell in love reading philosophy in a dusty library. I think we still have a chance. Bee wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. But fear held her back. Fear of failing again. Fear of disappointing him. Fear that she'd misunderstand what he was offering and lose everything once more. What if I'm not enough? The question emerged barely above a whisper. What if Charlotte and I bring so much scandal that your position becomes untenable? What if you wake up one day and regret choosing us over the life you could have had with Helena? Nathaniel reached out and cupped her face with both hands, his touch achingly gentle. Let me tell you what I regret not fighting for you 3 years ago. I regret letting my family's expectations matter more than my own happiness. I regret every single day I spent believing you were dead instead of searching harder, looking in more places, refusing to accept the impossible. What I don't regret, what I could never regret, is choosing you now, even if it costs me everything else. Tears spilled down Bee's cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. I love you, she whispered. I never stopped, even when I thought I should, even when I tried to convince myself you'd moved on. I never moved on. I just paused, waiting for something I didn't know I was waiting for. He brushed away her tears with his thumbs. You came back. You brought our daughter. You gave me a second chance I don't deserve but will spend the rest of my life trying to earn. So yes, Beatrice, I want to court you. I want to do this properly, with all of society watching and gossiping and placing their bets on whether we'll succeed. Because I refuse to hide anymore, from scandal, from my feelings, from the life I actually want, instead of the one I was supposed to want. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. I'm out of practice. You'll have to be patient while I remember how to do this. Bea laughed through her tears. I think you're managing quite well. He smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine, and nothing like the careful mask he'd worn at the Christmas ball. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful. Nothing like the desperate passion of that night 3 years ago, but something better, something that tasted of hope and second chances and love that had survived death itself. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. We're going to weather this scandal together, he murmured, and when the dust settles, I'm going to ask you to marry me. Properly this time, with a ring and a proposal where I say all the things I should have said before. And you'll say yes, because you love me, and because our daughter deserves to see her parents together, and because sometimes the most scandalous choice is also the right one. That's quite presumptuous, Your Grace. Is it? His eyes held hers with quiet confidence. Tell me you won't say yes. Tell me you don't want this. Us, together, building a family. Tell me, and I'll step back, give you space, content myself with being Charlotte's father and nothing more. Bea opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Because he was right. She did want this, desperately, terrifyingly, completely. I can't tell you that, she whispered, because it would be a lie. Then we're decided. Nathaniel straightened, his expression shifting from vulnerable to determined. Now, there's something important we need to do. What? Introduce me properly to my daughter, not as the Duke of Winterbourne or the man who's providing protection, as her father. The words hit Bea with unexpected force. Nathaniel, are you sure? Once you tell her, there's no taking it back. She'll expect. I want her to expect things from me. I want to be the man she runs to when she's frightened or excited. I want to teach her to ride and read and defend herself from the Gerald Hartwells of the world. I want, his voice roughened with emotion, I want to be her father in truth, not just in blood, but only if you're comfortable with that. Bea thought of Charlotte, who asked about her father constantly, who'd created an idealized version of him in her imagination, based on the few stories Bea had been willing to share. Charlotte deserved the truth. She deserved to know that her father wasn't some distant figure, but the man who'd opened his home to them, who'd promised protection, who looked at her with wonder and dawning love. I'm comfortable with it, Bea said. More than comfortable. She needs to know. She's been asking. Then let's tell her. Together. They found Charlotte in the nursery, with the doll she'd been given, staging an elaborate adventure involving a castle made of cushions and a dragon fashioned from a fur throw. She looked up as they entered, her face lighting with a smile that was pure Nathaniel. Mama, look! Betsy is fighting the dragon! How very brave of her! Bea settled onto the floor beside her daughter, heedless of her fine gown. Nathaniel joined them after a moment's hesitation, folding his long frame to sit cross-legged with surprising grace. Charlotte immediately scooted closer to him, curiosity bright in her grey eyes. Sir, would you like to play? You could be the knight who helps Betsy. I'd be honoured. Nathaniel accepted the wooden sword Charlotte pressed into his hands. Though perhaps before we battle dragons, there's something your mother and I need to tell you. Charlotte's expression turned solemn. Is it about the bad man, the one who wanted to take me away? Partly, Bea said gently, but it's also about something good, something important. What? Bea looked at Nathaniel, giving him the choice of how to proceed. He met her gaze, took a steadying breath, then turned his full attention to Charlotte. Do you remember asking me if I was your papa? Charlotte nodded, her small hands clutching Betsy the doll. You said you didn't know how to answer. That's because I was surprised. I didn't know you existed until you walked into the ballroom with your mother. But I've had time to think about it now, and I do know how to answer. He reached out carefully, giving Charlotte time to pull away if she chose. She didn't. The answer is yes. I'm your papa. Charlotte's eyes went wide. Truly, truly, I should have known about you from the beginning, and I'm very sorry I didn't. But now that I do, I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Charlotte simply stared at him, processing. Then her face split into a radiant smile. I have a papa! Mama! I have a papa! She launched herself at Nathaniel with the fearless enthusiasm of a 3-year-old who'd decided he was trustworthy. Nathaniel caught her reflexively, his arms closing around her small body with careful tenderness. Over Charlotte's head, his eyes found bees, and the emotion in them, wonder, joy, terror, mirror what she felt in her own chest. I've always wanted a papa, Charlotte said, her words muffled against Nathaniel's shoulder. Mama told me you lived far away, but now you're here. I'm here, Nathaniel agreed, his voice rough, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. Charlotte pulled back just enough to look at him seriously. And you'll help Mama, so the bad man can't take me away? I'll help your Mama. No one is taking you anywhere. Satisfied, Charlotte settled back against him with absolute trust. Good. Now you have to help Betsy fight the dragon. You promised. So I did. Nathaniel's voice held laughter and tears in equal measure. Well then, brave Betsy, let us vanquish this fearsome beast. Bea watched father and daughter play together, Charlotte chattering happily, while Nathaniel responded with surprising patience and creativity, and felt something inside her begin to heal. Not all at once. 3 years of wounds didn't close in a moment, but slowly, incrementally, the fear and guilt and grief that had defined her existence since the accident began to ease. She'd been so afraid of this moment, afraid Nathaniel would reject Charlotte, or accept her only out of duty, or prove unable to love a child he hadn't known existed. But watching them together, Charlotte giggling as Nathaniel made the dragon speak in ridiculous voices, Nathaniel's face transformed by genuine joy. Bea understood that her fears had been unfounded. He loved their daughter already. Not because he felt obligated, but because Charlotte was impossible not to love. Bright and brave, and utterly herself. And perhaps, in time, he might forgive Bea for the choices she'd made. Perhaps they really could build something honest from the wreckage of the past 3 years. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough. 3 weeks later, the drawing room at Winterbourne Manor was filled with London's most influential gossip, assembled under the guise of afternoon tea, but really present to witness what promised to be the most scandalous announcement of the season. Nathaniel Thornfield presided over the gathering, with the regal composure of a woman who decided that if scandal was inevitable, it would be scandal on her terms. Bea sat beside Nathaniel on a settee, Charlotte perched between them in a new dress of blue velvet that made her grey eyes appear almost silver. The child sensed the importance of the occasion and sat unnaturally still, her small hand clasped tight in Bea's. Ladies, gentlemen, Nathaniel's voice cut through the murmur of speculation. Thank you for joining us today. I've asked you here to make an announcement that will no doubt provide conversation for some time to come. Nervous titters rippled through the assembled guests. 3 years ago, Lady Beatrice Ashworth was declared dead following a terrible carriage accident. I mourned her, as many of you did. What none of us knew was that she had survived, had been living quietly in Somerset, recovering from injuries that left her unable to send word of her survival. He paused, his hand finding Bea's and squeezing gently. What none of us also knew, what even Lady Beatrice didn't know at the time of the accident, was that she was carrying my child. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Nathaniel waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Charlotte is my daughter. I acknowledge her fully and without reservation. I have established a trust for her future and will ensure she wants for nothing. Any person who questions her parentage or attempts to use her for their own advantage will answer to me personally. Lady Pemberton, never one for tact, spoke up immediately. Your Grace, surely you don't intend to legitimize. I intend to protect my daughter and the woman I love from precisely the kind of judgment you're about to pronounce. Nathaniel interrupted coolly. Lady Beatrice and I had an understanding before the accident. We were prevented from formalizing that understanding by tragedy and circumstance. Now that those obstacles have been removed, I intend to marry her with all due speed. The gasps this time were louder, mixed with the furious whispers of scandal spreading in real time. Bea felt her face flush as every eye in the room fixed on her with varying degrees of shock, disapproval, and avaricious interest. But Nathaniel's hand remained steady in hers, and Charlotte's small fingers squeezed reassuringly. "Mama," Charlotte whispered, "does this mean we're staying with Papa forever?" "Yes, darling," Bea whispered back. "We're staying." Lavinia stood then, drawing attention with the natural authority of her position. The Duke has spoken plainly about matters that might have remained private. He has done so because rumours and speculation do more damage than truth, however uncomfortable. Lady Beatrice is under the protection of this house. Charlotte is my granddaughter, and any person who wishes to remain in good standing with the Winterbourne family will treat them both with the respect they deserve. It was a threat wrapped in courtesy, delivered with the kind of steel that reminded everyone why Lavinia Thornfield had been one of London's most formidable hostesses for 3 decades. The gossips, cowed but not defeated, murmured among themselves. Lady Pemberton looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Mrs. Whitmore appeared torn between disapproval and the social advantages of being close to a scandal this juicy. Lord Ashford, ever the politician, was already calculating how this situation might be turned to advantage. The tea continued, strained but civil, and by the time the guests departed, Bea's head was pounding from the effort of maintaining her composure. Charlotte had grown restless midway through and been whisked away by a sympathetic maid. Now Bea stood at the window, watching snow fall over the gardens and trying to process what had just occurred. "That went better than expected," Nathaniel said from behind her. Bea laughed without humour. "Better? Half of them looked at me like I was a fortune hunter who trained a child to... Half of them will say whatever they think will stir the most controversy. The other half will wait to see which way society's tide turns before committing to an opinion." He moved to stand beside her. "But the announcement is made. Charlotte is acknowledged, and in 6 weeks, you'll be my Duchess, and none of this will matter anymore." 6 weeks. Bea's voice was faint. "Nathaniel, that's too fast. Not fast enough." He turned her to face him. "We've wasted 3 years, Beatrice. I don't intend to waste another moment, unless you need more time." Did she? Bea examined her feelings with the kind of ruthless honesty the past 3 years had taught her. She loved him. She'd never stopped. Charlotte needed stability and the security of legitimate parentage, and waiting wouldn't make society any kinder. It would only prolong the period where she existed in limbo, neither guest nor family. 6 weeks, she agreed, but nothing elaborate. "I don't think I could survive another performance like today's tea. Private ceremony, immediate family only. We'll publish the announcement and let society draw its own conclusions. Your mother will be disappointed." "My mother," Nathaniel said dryly, "has had 3 years to plan my wedding to Helena. I think she can survive the disappointment of a smaller affair. Besides, this way Charlotte can be present without subjecting her to the spectacle of 500 strangers." Bea leaned into him, letting herself be held for the first time since that night in the study, when everything had exploded. His arms came around her with the kind of secure strength she'd forgotten existed. "I'm frightened," she admitted against his chest. "Of what?" "Of waking up and discovering this was a dream, that I'm still in Somerset, alone with Charlotte, and you're just a memory I torture myself with. This is real." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You're here. Charlotte is mine, and in 6 weeks, you'll be my wife. That's as real as it gets. Promise me something, anything. Promise me that even when this gets hard, and it will get hard, Nathaniel, society won't forgive us easily. Promise me you won't regret choosing us." He pulled back just enough to cup her face, making her meet his eyes. I could live 100 years and never regret choosing you. The only regret I carry is not choosing you sooner. Not fighting harder 3 years ago. Not being brave enough to claim what I wanted instead of what was expected. You're being brave now. Because I learned the cost of cowardice. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I lost you once. I'm not losing you again. Scandal or no scandal. Even if it costs you everything else. You and Charlotte are everything else. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. The title, the position, society's approval, none of it matters compared to having the two of you in my life. I'd rather be a disgraced duke with a family I love than a respected one living a hollow life with a woman I don't. Bee's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears this time, not the bitter ones she'd shed so often in the past 3 years. I love you. I love you too. Always have. Always will. He kissed her then, properly, with the kind of passion they'd denied themselves since her return. No more stolen moments or careful restraint, just honest desire and love that had survived impossible odds. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathaniel smiled, the genuine, unguarded smile she remembered from before, when he'd been just Nathaniel and she'd been just Beatrice, before titles and tragedy had complicated everything. Come, he said, taking her hand. Charlotte will be wondering where we are. I promised to read her the story about the Dragon Knight before bed. You're taking your fatherly duties very seriously. I have 3 years of bedtime stories to make up for. I intend to start immediately. They walked hand in hand through Winterbourne's corridors, and Bee felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Peace. Not the absence of problems. Scandals still swirled around them. Society's judgment remained sharp, and there would be complications she couldn't yet anticipate. But underneath all that, beneath the fear and uncertainty, was a foundation of love and commitment that felt solid enough to weather whatever storms might come. Charlotte was waiting in the nursery, already in her nightgown, Betsy the doll clutched in her arms. She brightened when she saw them. "Papa, you came. Mama said you would, but I wasn't sure." "I always keep my promises to you," Nathaniel said, scooping her up. "Now, which book shall we read?" "The dragon one, with the brave knight and the princess who fights her own battles." "A fine choice." He settled into the chair by the fire with Charlotte in his lap, Bee perching on the armrest beside them. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, Bee listened to Nathaniel's voice weaving the familiar story, watched Charlotte's face light with imagination, and thought about the strange path that had brought them here. 3 years ago, she'd been declared dead and lost everything. Tonight, she sat in the Duke of Winterbourne's nursery, listening to him read to their daughter, wearing a ring he'd given her that morning, a simple band of gold with a sapphire the colour of her eyes. In 6 weeks, they would marry. Society would talk. There would be those who never forgave the scandal of it all. But there would also be this, Charlotte's laughter, Nathaniel's steady presence, a family built from love instead of obligation. It wasn't the life Bee had imagined when she'd stepped through Winterbourne's doors 3 weeks ago. It was better, harder certainly, more complicated, but better, because some truths couldn't stay buried, no matter how deep you tried to bury them. And love, real love, the kind that survived death and scandal and 3 years of silence, was the most stubborn truth of all. Snow fell over Winterbourne Manor on Christmas Eve, blanketing the grounds in white that sparkled like diamonds under the ballroom's light. But this year's Christmas ball was different, smaller, more intimate, filled with people who'd proven themselves true friends through scandal and social warfare. Bee stood at the edge of the ballroom in a gown of deep emerald green, watching Nathaniel dance with Charlotte. Their daughter, now 4 years old and growing more confident by the day, stood on her father's feet as he waltzed her around the floor, her laughter ringing clear and bright. She wore a dress of ivory silk with a red sash, and her dark curls had been painstakingly arranged with ribbons. "She's going to expect him to dance with her at every ball," Lavinia said, appearing at Bee's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. I suspect he'll oblige her until she's old enough to be embarrassed by paternal attention. Bee accepted the champagne gratefully. Thank you for all of this. I know you preferred a larger celebration. What I prefer, Lavinia said archly, is my son's happiness, which for the first time in years seems genuine. You've given him that, Beatrice, and you've given me a granddaughter who is equal parts delightful and exhausting. I consider the trade worthwhile. It had taken time for Lavinia to fully accept the situation. Months of careful diplomacy, Charlotte's infectious charm working its magic, and gradually seeing how Nathaniel flourished with Bee at his side. But they'd reached an understanding, helped considerably by the arrival 2 months ago of a second grandchild. As if summoned by the thought, a soft cry drifted from the corridor outside. Bee's hand went instinctively to her still flat stomach before she remembered. The baby wasn't hers to soothe anymore. He had a perfectly capable nurse for that. I should check on Alexander, she murmured. The nurse has him well in hand, but if you must play the doting mother, I won't stop you. Lavinia's eyes twinkled, though I do hope you'll save some of that maternal energy. The way Nathaniel looks at you suggests there may be more grandchildren in my future. Bee felt heat rise to her cheeks. Lavinia, what? You've been married nearly a year. These things happen, and frankly, after the scandal of your courtship, a rapidly expanding nursery would be positively mundane by comparison. She swept away before Bee could formulate a response, leaving her torn between outrage and laughter. The past year had been many things, but mundane certainly wasn't one of them. The scandal had been every bit as brutal as Bee had feared. Half of society had cut them entirely. Invitations dried up. Old friends became distant acquaintances. Helena's family had spread vicious rumours that took months to counter. Gerald Hartwell had attempted blackmail, until Nathaniel's solicitors and a very pointed visit from the Duke himself had convinced him that pursuing the matter further would be profoundly unwise for his continued health and freedom. But through it all, Nathaniel had remained steadfast. He'd endured the whispers and the social snubbing with aristocratic disdain, making it clear that anyone who wished to maintain good relations with Winterbourne would treat his Duchess with respect. He'd acknowledged Charlotte publicly and repeatedly, daring anyone to question her place in his family. And when Alexander had been born, a healthy boy with Nathaniel's dark hair and Bee's blue eyes, he'd celebrated as openly as any proud father, regardless of society's reaction. The waltz ended, and Charlotte immediately demanded another, but Nathaniel, laughing, redirected her toward her grandmother, with a promise to dance again later. Then he crossed the ballroom to Bee, with the kind of purposeful stride that still made her heart race. "My Duchess," he said, offering his hand, "I believe this dance is mine." "Is it?" "I don't recall being asked." "I'm asking now. Dance with me, Beatrice." She placed her hand in his and let him lead her onto the floor. They moved together with the ease of long practice. They'd spent many evenings since their wedding teaching each other properly, making up for all the dances they'd never shared during those early years when propriety had kept them apart. "Happy?" Nathaniel murmured as they turned. "Disgustingly so," Bee admitted, "though I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for society to invent some new scandal, or for your mother to suddenly decide she disapproves after all. My mother adores you. She told me yesterday that you're the daughter she never had, which I'm choosing to interpret as high praise rather than an insult to my late sister. And society? Society can go hang." He spun her with theatrical flair, making her laugh. "I have everything I need. My wife, my children, a home filled with love instead of obligation. The rest is just noise. Such scandalous sentiment from a duke. You've corrupted me thoroughly. I blame you entirely." "Good." Bee stretched up to press a quick kiss to his jaw. "I worked very hard on that corruption. I'd hate to think it was wasted effort." His eyes darkened with the kind of promise that had led to Alexander's conception. "If you keep looking at me like that, we're going to scandalize our guests by disappearing before the evening ends. Would that be so terrible? You're a terrible influence, Duchess, and you love it." I love you, he corrected, serious now despite the light word. Every day, I wake up and remember you're actually here, that Charlotte exists, that Alexander is sleeping down the hall, and I thank whatever divine power saw fit to bring you back to me. Bee's eyes stung with happy tears, even with all the scandal, all the complications, especially with those. They're proof that what we have is real, not some polite arrangement designed for society's approval. We chose each other knowing exactly what it would cost. That makes it worth infinitely more than any proper courtship ever could. The music swelled around them, and Bee let herself sink into the moment. The warmth of Nathaniel's hand at her waist, the secure strength of his arms, the absolute certainty in his eyes when he looked at her. This was happiness. Complicated, hard-won, scandalous happiness. But happiness, nonetheless. When the dance ended, they were immediately swarmed by Charlotte, demanding attention, and several guests with questions about the new baby. The evening continued in a blur of conversation and music and the peculiar joy of being surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand by them through scandal. Later, much later, after the guests had departed and Charlotte was tucked into bed with Betsy, Bee and Nathaniel stood together in Alexander's nursery, watching their son sleep. He was 2 months old, perfect and tiny, with miniature fists that waved even in sleep as if he were conducting some invisible orchestra. Do you ever think about what might have happened if you'd never returned? Nathaniel asked softly. Every day, Bee admitted. I think about Charlotte growing up without knowing her father. I think about you married to Helena, living a life that never quite fit. I think about all the moments we would have lost. And then I look at this, at you, at our children, at the life we've built. And I know that walking through those doors a year ago was the bravest thing I've ever done. The best thing too. Nathaniel's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. No regrets? Only that I waited so long, that I let fear keep me away for 3 years when I should have trusted that what we had was strong enough to survive anything. You trusted eventually. That's what matters. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Alexander sleep and Charlotte's even breathing from the connected nursery, until Bee remembered something. I have a gift for you for Christmas. You're my Christmas gift, Nathaniel said. Anything else is redundant. Humour me. She retrieved a small wrapped package from the mantel and handed it to him. He opened it carefully, extracting a leather-bound journal filled with blank pages. His brow furrowed with confusion. It's for writing, Bee explained. I thought you might want to document everything. Charlotte's milestones, Alexander's firsts, our daily life. So when we're old and grey and watching our grandchildren cause chaos, we'll have proof that we survived the scandal and built something beautiful anyway. Nathaniel's expression softened into something that made her breath catch. It's perfect. Thank you. You're welcome. Now, about your gift to me. How did you know I got you something? Because you've been smiling smugly all week, which means you've planned something you think is very clever. It's not clever. It's practical. He pulled her from the nursery into their bedroom, where a large wrapped portrait leaned against the wall. I commissioned this months ago. It was supposed to be finished for your birthday, but the artist took longer than expected. Bee unwrapped it with trembling hands, then gasped. It was a family portrait, Nathaniel in his ducal finery, Bee in a gown of midnight blue, Charlotte standing between them with Betsy in her arms, and tiny Alexander cradled in Bee's arms. But it wasn't the technical skill that made her eyes fill with tears. It was the love evident in every brushstroke, the way the artist had captured the absolute joy on Charlotte's face, the protective tenderness in Nathaniel's expression, the fierce contentment in her own eyes. It's for the gallery, Nathaniel said. So everyone who ever walks through Winterbourne will know exactly what we fought for, what we chose. It's perfect. Bee turned into his arms, letting him hold her while happy tears fell. You're perfect. All of this is perfect. Not perfect. We're scandal-ridden and socially controversial, and probably going to be gossiped about for decades. But we're together. We're together. And nothing else matters. Outside, snow continued to fall over Winterbourne Manor, blanketing the grounds in white that would melt come spring. Inside, In a bedroom that smelled of wood smoke and lavender, a duke and his duchess held each other and marvelled at the impossible second chance they'd been given. 3 years ago, Lady Beatrice Ashworth had been declared dead and lost everything. 1 year ago, she'd walked through Winterbourne's doors with their daughter and reclaimed her life. Tonight, she stood in her husband's arms, with their son sleeping peacefully down the hall and their daughter dreaming of dragons, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Love didn't die when the body did. It simply waited, patient and stubborn, until the moment when coming back became possible. And when that moment came, however scandalous, however complicated, however impossible it seemed, love proved stronger than death, more resilient than time, and entirely worth whatever it cost to reclaim it. Some truths refused to stay buried, and the truth of Nathaniel and Beatrice's love was the most stubborn of all. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this Christmas miracle. If this story touched your heart, reminded you that love can survive impossible odds, or made you believe in second chances, please show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need hope and romance in their lives.